Ready.
Honor. Integrity. Patriotism. A commitment to excellence. The United States Air Force Academy.
Forward. On.
Since the mid-1950s, the Academy has been the training ground for many of the nation's top pilots and military officers. Courageous pilots who have flown thousands of missions in Vietnam and other wars. Heroic pilots killed in action. Pilots who were captured, spending years as prisoners of war. It was their endurance of torture and isolation and their ability to survive that proved them worthy of their Academy appointment and sets the standard for every cadet who follows in their footsteps.
To the rear. March!
As an officer in the largest and best-equipped Air Force in the world. In 1976, women joined the ranks of the Cadet Corps. It was an historically controversial and divisive moment at the Academy because many in the Air Force believed women simply do not belong here. Welcome. I'm John Ferrugia. The past 5 months have been the most tumultuous in the history of the U.S. Air Force Academy. The entire leadership, including 2 generals, has been replaced. The famous inscription, "Bring me men," has been removed from the granite walls where it was once thought to be as permanent as the institution itself. And there are 4 separate investigations into the conduct of male cadets toward women at the Academy. All this because a 7 News investigation found female cadets who reported sexual assault were systematically investigated, often punished for infractions unrelated to the assault, and in some cases drummed out of the Academy. This is the story of women abused by fellow cadets and betrayed by the very honor code they swore to uphold, and how these revelations have shaken the very foundation of the United States Air Force Academy.
I grew up in this backyard looking at the sky all the time, and every time I saw a plane, it really gave me chills. I knew flying was something that I always wanted to do. The dream was to be an Air Force officer and to fly jets.
The Air Force Academy, along with the other service academies, is the dream of thousands of the nation's brightest and most patriotic young people who embrace the regimented military lifestyle and pledge themselves to a code of honor. But behind the facade of spit polish and sharp creases is a culture that many women have found to be accepting of rape and sexual assault.
If the administration doesn't kick you out, the rest of the cadets will. So don't report it.
A culture where a male cadet can be expelled for lying but can receive only a minor reprimand for date rape.
And it seemed like these guys were getting off the hook, and if they did get punished, it was like a slap on the hand.
A culture where women who report a crime are themselves targeted by their peers and the administration for expulsion.
They wanted to put blame on somebody, and it was hard to put it on 3 guys as opposed to 1 freshman girl.
A culture where it's made clear to women cadets that if they report a rape by another cadet, their days at the Academy are numbered.
If you want your career to just dissolve in front of you, then go report.
When Liz left her family farm for the Air Force Academy, she knew as a freshman she was in for the toughest regimen of her life.
You don't have a voice at all. And anybody that tries to have a voice, is reprimanded and ridiculed to some extent by the upperclassmen.
These upperclassmen control cadets' lives, giving reprimands or hits for any real or imagined violations.
This person can ruin your life as well as the lives of the other 30 or so that are in your class, in your squadron.
They control you.
Yes.
Liz says she was targeted as a freshman by friendly emails from an upperclassman, offering to hold some everyday items for her that freshmen weren't allowed to have. But then, knowing he had something he could hold against her, the emails turned ugly. So he was blackmailing you?
Yes. He said, "You know what you have to do." And then at that point, I would say no.
But no wasn't enough. His threats intensified, and Liz was desperate.
And if there was something that I had done that was, if it was insubordination or something like that, it would have come back down on all my classmates. He was telling me that if I wanted to rectify the problem, that I had to talk to him in person, and he would meet me at the bottom of the stairs.
And there, outside her dorm, on Academy grounds, she was raped.
He forced me physically at that point.
After the assault, Liz hit bottom.
You are completely degraded. You feel like you're dirty. You feel like, you know, nobody's going to believe you. You know, you're not worth anything.
Because she knew he could damage her career, she decided not to report it.
I really sincerely wanted to completely forget about it and try to keep moving on with my career.
But he wouldn't let you?
No, it didn't end. From the time period of August to March of my freshman year, I was raped and assaulted 5 times. And it was the hardest time. I just remember being so scared. I knew that anything that I said was going to be blown up. He was threatening to spread rumors about me that were untrue, you know, as to, you know, get others punished in my class. And
all the while, Liz's closest friends were telling her not to report the rapes by her superior.
People over and over continued to tell me that the victim becomes the victimized, you know, don't talk.
That is the message that seems to permeate the culture of the academy. The message that no current woman cadet can speak about without hiding her identity.
Rape is acceptable, and don't say anything about it. Because if you do, they're going to find some way to keep you quiet, to get you out, or to punish you, to get you in trouble.
Anne is a rape survivor presently at the Air Force Academy.
No one wants to report. They know and they've seen other cadets get in trouble for reporting their sexual assault.
These recent cases come almost 10 years after the Academy admitted it had a serious problem with sexual assaults. In fact, in 1994 and 1995, a GAO investigation found pervasive problems, including unwelcome, deliberate physical contact of a sexual nature. In response, the Academy set up the Cadets Advocating Sexual Integrity and Education, or CASE program, so women would have a hotline to call, a hotline staffed by trained cadets. Anne is one cadet who worked closely with the CASE program.
In the time that I've been familiar with the CASE program, I have known of roughly 20 reports in one semester.
In one semester?
In one semester.
20 women who reported attacks?
Correct. The administration knows. They get briefed about the quantity of calls, and they know of the ones who have officially reported.
Do you know the number of female cadets on an annual basis who call the hotline who say they've been sexually assaulted while at this institution?
No.
Why not?
I guess I'm confused as to asking why not. That is not the focus of our counseling program.
Major Kelly Phillips Henry is Chief of Sexual Assault Services at the Air Force Academy.
When you want to know how many of those occur at the Air Force Academy, is that not important?
Every sexual assault to any of our cadets are important. One is too many. So for us, what we look at is when they report, how do we help them maintain themselves, continue with their academics, continue with the stresses so that they do not disenroll. That is the focus of a victim-focused program.
2 weeks after this interview, the Air Force supplied information admitting that 24 women called the hotline in 2002 reporting sexual assault. In January of this year, officials told us there had been 91 reports to the hotline since 1996. 20 of those cases had been formally investigated, and at the time, officials told us no cadet had ever been court-martialed for assaulting another cadet.
Was the CASE program any help to you?
No, not at all. I felt that if I called them, it's a bunch of cadets, and I didn't want other cadets to know about my case.
Despite the risks, Liz decided to report her assault to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. That began months of questioning by investigators over and over, every detail.
My story was completely straight and narrow, you know, the entire time. And, you know, they were trying to trip me up. They were trying to find fault in my story, and it never surfaced.
And while her story never changed, her life at the academy did.
It became clear to me that I was going to be the black sheep, you know, the one in the academy that that, you know, was not liked.
Finally, she was called in by her superiors and told the investigation had ended.
They told me that I was to be expecting a number of Form 10s. They said Class D hits coming down.
Which are reprimands.
Right, punishments. One for sex in the dorms, for being raped. One for alcohol, because my perpetrator was buying alcohol for my classmates and coming back to me and telling me that I owed him for it. Not monetarily, but, you know, in favors. And then the third Class D hit was fraternization, because he was an upperclassman and I was a freshman.
You're telling me that you reported a rape and that you're getting a reprimand for having sexual activity in the dorm.
Right. I was flabbergasted. I was just really floored. I remember I started to cry as I'm looking at these officers, and they all know that everything I've done is, you know, the right thing to do. I've been standing up for what I believe in. My case was so strong.
What was the message then to other women?
To not at all talk. I mean, who wants to talk when they're going to be punished? You know, each individual Class D hit is grounds for disenrollment.
These are believable women, and I'm appalled.
We took our findings, along with statements of former women cadets, to Senator Wayne Allard. Now, he's a member of the Armed Services Committee and also the Board of Visitors at the Air Force Academy.
This is very disturbing.
Almost immediately, he sent an official letter to the Secretary of the Air Force requesting a full and complete investigation into this matter. He said he was concerned that school officials may have attempted to prevent an investigation.
You came to me with the facts that you shared with me, and I carried those forward to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He agreed that we have a serious problem, and as a result of that, we've written a letter, and I know that they've increased the intensity of that investigation. I think that they understand that he means business, and so we'll see what happens with the investigation.
I've gone up and down in my chain of command, and I've lost faith in my chain of command, and that's why I'm turning to you to hopefully get people to realize that this is a problem and it needs fixed. We need help.
After a year of fighting the system, Liz finally gave up her dream and left the academy.
What's driving you?
What's driving me is the thought of the person that is my spitting image before I went in the academy. The fairly innocent, naive girl that doesn't have the first thing to believe about the military, doesn't know anything about what she's getting into. That image is driving me, because that girl is walking into a pit of wolves, a sea of sharks, and has no idea. It's got to change. It's got to change.
Liz is one of dozens of female cadets who have reported being raped or sexually assaulted here at the Air Force Academy. Coming up, a female cadet who wrote us in frustration, the email that has now shaken the academy to its core.
You see a lot of girls disappear. You know, one day they're there and the next day you're gone.
Don't report it. You know, deal with it on your own. Talk to your friends about it. Talk to your teammates. Don't report it. That's the message.
I went in and told them what actually happened, and they told me I was a liar.
Last fall, Jessica Brakey was a cadet about to be kicked out of the Air Force Academy. Academy officials said she had a personality disorder. Brakey says she had been raped by a classmate in the first few weeks of basic training.
It was a horrible experience. I thought I was just going to tuck it away and just move on with my life.
She admits she never reported it, thinking she could simply ignore it and go on with her life.
You know, I tried to just kind of put it away, I guess, in my head, like it never happened, and just carry on with things.
She fell into depression and conduct problems and finally told Academy officials what had happened. But it was too late. They had already decided she was out of the Cadet Corps. In frustration, she sent this email to news organizations all over Colorado and elsewhere. It read in part, "Since I have been here, I know of many females who have been sexually assaulted, including myself. Most girls who are raped end up leaving on their own after being pushed out by the system, or, if they choose to stay, endure so much political garbage that most of the time it deters them from reporting at all. Can your office help somehow?" While some news organizations ignored Brakey's plea, we began an investigation to find out if it was true, and if it was true, if it was a systemic problem. We spent weeks looking over class rolls and other documents trying to find female cadets who had left the academy. We began calling former cadets and found many victims, as well as others who had helpful information about an academy system set up to punish those who came forward.
There wasn't a lot of support like I thought there was going to be.
We found several former cadets who were afraid to report sexual assaults because they had been warned about what to expect by their senior female trainers.
This woman said, actually, that happened to me when I was a freshman, it happened to me when I was a sophomore. One situation was date rape, the other situation was just straight up rape. And I'm thinking, this woman has got to be nuts, because there's no way that could happen here. I mean, it's the military.
But that changed when Ruth was called to an upperclassman's room. She says her military superior offered her alcohol and then raped her. She knew if she reported the attack, she would be investigated.
And I was very scared of getting an alcohol hit, or a sex in the dorms, or whatever else they could come up with. So it seemed to me a lot easier to deal with my own emotional instability on this situation than telling the administration and having the possibility of getting all these Class D hits and possibly getting kicked out of the school that I'd worked so hard to get into.
But this was a crime.
It doesn't matter.
I realized it was crime. And I wasn't even thinking about disciplinary problems at the academy. I didn't even care. What I wanted to report a crime, because to me that was more important.
Marie, now attending college in the Northeast, also went to the room of an upperclassman, was also drinking, and says she was raped and sodomized. After reporting, she was investigated and received 7 of the most serious reprimands and punishments possible, including sexual activity in cadet dormitories, drinking alcohol, and fraternization with upperclassmen.
They wanted to put blame on somebody, and it was hard to put it on 3 guys as opposed to 1 freshman girl.
A cadet counselor at the Academy's Rape Crisis Center had encouraged her to report, but after she was reprimanded, the counselor was so disturbed that he resigned from the sex assault program. His resignation letter said in part, "I encouraged her to come forward. This was a grave mistake on my part. I should never have trusted the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. I should have never trusted the command representatives." After our initial report, the Air Force decided to move the case forward. Marie has now told her story in a hearing, and the case is pending. But there are many other former cadets whose cases went nowhere.
He ended up pulling me into a bedroom and shutting me in there, and that's when it happened.
Louise says fellow cadets harassed her after she reported her attack. She eventually left the academy.
But I was able to get this person to leave my room, and then I just cried all night.
Lindsay says when she asked the academy for help after her sexual assault, investigators told her the attack was all in her head.
I tried to fight him off for about 2 hours, but I was just crawling around the room to get away from him.
Lynn was ill in bed when an upperclassman assaulted her in her dorm room. She says academy officials did nothing. And these former cadets say they know more victims who remain in the academy.
I can think of around 27.
27 women now at the academy.
Yes, 27.
All say things need to change before the next class of cadets.
The academy has a policy, as we've talked about, for 0 tolerance for rape, but it's actually 0 tolerance for the victims. They accuse the victims of some other minor infractions and then drum them out of the academy, because no victims equals no abuse, therefore it's not anyone's fault.
These cadets and others say the academy leadership here at the time simply didn't take sexual assault seriously. When we come back, the story becomes a national scandal, and the former superintendent is forced to respond. Our initial requests for an interview with the former Air Force Academy superintendent to discuss allegations of sexual assault were virtually ignored. General John Gallagher's staff told us the allegations simply didn't rise to his level for a response.
But I think it's our responsibility.
But that was before we contacted members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who in turn began making inquiries of senior Air Force leaders and other top officials at the Pentagon. As our investigative stories continued and a tidal wave of congressional and public outrage began to build, General Gallagher decided he had to respond. In a February interview, he implied that embarrassment kept women from reporting sexual assault.
It's an issue that many people are very uncomfortable talking about, much less addressing from a professional standpoint. But we're going to do that. We're not going to sweep it under the rug.
When the Air Force became aware of our investigation, Gallagher began meeting with groups of cadets, including victims of sexual assault. And he met more than once with the Secretary of the Air Force and other high officials to figure out how to address what had become a major political and operational problem.
They will be sending a team that will be arriving here later this week to take a look at, from a soup to nuts approach, education, training, processes, etc., dealing with sexual assault.
What is clear is that under his command, there was little effort to assess the overall problem of sexual assault. In fact, the administration didn't even know the number of women cadets who reported sexual assault to the Academy's medical team.
That is an area that, again, needs to be improved.
On this survey, was there a question about, have you ever been sexually assaulted?
No.
The general had the opportunity to find out the scope of the problem, putting out a sexual assault survey in mid-January.
That was not one of the questions, and I'll be very candid and tell you that probably should have been a question.
While some at the Academy were aware of dozens of sexual assaults, only 20 cases were officially reported for investigation in the past 7 years.
How many cadets at this institution have been court-martialed for sexually assaulting another cadet?
Cadet assaulting another cadet, none that I'm aware of have been successfully or have been court-martialed.
Not one?
Not one.
So, does the superintendent believe the women who reported sexual assault?
Yes, we have no reason not to believe them.
Okay. Is the program fair to women?
And that's exactly what we have to look at. And I would submit to you, based upon the feedback we're getting, that the expectations and even the intent of the effort, the realities of it, are falling short. So we need to take that on.
Does that mean changing the culture here?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, to me, culture, climate, atmosphere, education, training, perceptions, feedback, how the system works, that's a tough challenge, but we've addressed it, and we're going to attempt to do better at it.
General Gallagher's response and the subsequent arrival of a team of investigators from Washington made it clear Air Force Academy officials knew they were dealing with a national scandal. That week, the New York Times published a front-page story relying on our help in contacting victims. The results of our ongoing investigation appeared in the Washington Post, other national newspapers, as well as Colorado publications. Editorials appeared nationwide, calling on Congress and the Air Force to make dramatic changes in the culture and climate at the Academy.
Lately, there have been grave questions about both character and leadership at the Academy.
As the investigation continued, national television stories followed.
The top general of the Air Force promised a thorough investigation
to begin investigating allegations of sexual assault
by their classmates.
The number of female cadets who say they were sexually assaulted has now reached more than 50.
And in some instances, the female cadets say they were the ones punished.
The national stories prompted more women to come forward with even more disturbing information.
I feel sorry for the girls that are still there.
This former cadet, whose name is Sharon, reported to Academy officials that she was raped on Academy grounds in 1999. Well, now her mother is an Air Force officer and a nurse and administrator at the Academy Hospital. She told us she was stunned when a nurse practitioner told her that Sharon wasn't the only cadet sexually assaulted that year.
So far that year, they had had 48 people that had at least reported being sexually assaulted, either via the hotline or her personally, that she had knowledge of.
48 people?
Yeah, and my question at that point was, excuse me, that's 10% of the female population on this academy.
At that point, I was sort of hoping that I was alone, that hadn't happened to anybody else, and it obviously happens all the time.
Sharon and many current cadets reported their attacks to the office of Senator Wayne Allard because despite the claims of General Gallagher, they had little confidence in the leadership of the Air Force Academy.
We take this very, very seriously. We don't tolerate and condone sexual harassment, much less sexual assault.
In this same interview, General Gallagher made a stunning revelation that female cadets who reported rape or sexual assault were actually investigated themselves. What did this mean to victims? That story when we come back. At the Air Force Academy, it is known as the Amnesty Clause. It is supposed to offer protection for female cadets who report rape or sexual assault, protection from getting punished for breaking cadet rules like drinking or staying out late. But our investigation found despite the Amnesty Clause, many women who reported were often punished, given what are called disciplinary hits.
There's always some loophole where they can pull some kind of hit against you.
In the end, women cadets have no trust nor confidence they will be treated fairly.
If you want your career to just dissolve in front of you, then go report.
Any of those infractions that are directly associated, they're thrown in amnesty.
It doesn't say that. It says it may be.
Well, that's exactly right. It may be.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the option.
That's correct.
But many cadets have found that once they reported, the Amnesty Clause and indeed the Air Force Honor Code was used against them to ensure they were punished. Here's how it works. Say a woman reports a rape that occurred on a Saturday. The Office of Special Investigations begins to investigate the incident and also the background of the woman who is reporting. If Air Force officials learn of other infractions that occurred, let's say, on a Thursday before the sexual assault, they then corner the victim with the allegations. According to the Honor Code, if she denies them, she is then expelled for lying. But if she admits them, she is then punished for the infractions. Infractions the Academy would have never known about had she not reported the rape.
If we're aware of an incident that was 3 days prior to the actual sexual assault incident, and we're aware of that, we will take disciplinary action.
They told you that because you reported the rape, you were going to get reprimanded for having sexual activity in the dorm.
Right. I was flabbergasted. I was just really floored.
We are the first line of responsibility because this is our institution.
General John Jumper is the Air Force Chief of Staff and the superintendent's boss.
There is no circumstance in which a female comes forward and alleges a felony and is willing to talk about the details of that case so that we can prosecute the felon. There is no case then in which minor infractions should then be investigated and then held against that woman as leverage not to pursue the felony.
Do you think there are women who have come forward and reported sexual assault that have been treated unfairly at this academy?
Unfairly is probably in the eye of the individual. It's not been done as well as it should have been.
And they were hurt because of it?
And they were hurt because of that.
These revelations caused a firestorm in Congress and rocked the Air Force. Coming up, from the Pentagon to the White House, a call for major changes in the culture, climate, and leadership at the Air Force Academy.
We should never be in a position where the United States Air Force commissions a criminal.
The felon is the one I want out of my Air Force. I don't want him at the Air Force Academy.
There is a serious concern about what has happened to the women that you brought to my attention and you brought to the attention in your story.
It is reprehensible for a rapist or someone who would sexually assault a woman or who protects these bums who do to become a leader of airmen.
It was a stunning message delivered by the Air Force Secretary to the Cadet Corps in response to the 7 News investigation into sex assaults at the Air Force Academy.
Expect major changes and expect them across the board.
Unlike the initial reaction from Academy leadership, Air Force Secretary James Roche immediately understood the allegations represented a far deeper problem.
Anti-Semitism isn't something that Jews fix. Racism isn't something that minorities fix. And this is not something that the women at the Academy fix. This gets fixed when the men at the Academy, the cadets, the males, make it clear that they will not tolerate among them anyone who does something like this, or who harbors someone who does something like this, or who shuns someone who comes forward. That's the cultural change we have to make sure happens.
To that end, Air Force Chief of Staff General John Jumper made it clear to cadets that those who protect assailants were just as guilty as perpetrators.
There's no such thing as loyalty by silence. You don't protect someone that you know has committed a criminal activity because they themselves have violated the basics of mutual respect.
As our investigative reports continued, more current and former cadets came forward to report being attacked. Air Force officials continued their own investigation, and within days, Secretary Roche made a preliminary report to Congress.
The part that is the saddest, Senator, and this is comparable to what is occurring throughout universities in the United States, is that while we have seen whatever the number is, 25, 50, there's probably another 100 that we're not seeing.
As public and congressional pressure increased, even the White House responded.
Well, sir, this is a serious matter, and this is a matter that the President has concern about, and making certain that throughout our society, including at the Air Force Academy and other places, that every step is taken to preserve the liberty and security of people who attend these institutions.
But despite the pressure, the Air Force stood fast. The Chief of Staff made it clear he was not ready to fire anyone.
The Academy leadership out here is going to be part of this solution.
You don't think the Academy leadership has been part of the problem?
I'm not ready to judge that yet because, as I've told you, I'm out gathering facts, and we will make those decisions when we have the facts before us that allow us to make those kinds of decisions. I'm not going to do it out of hand.
But Jumper's boss didn't see it that way. The Air Force Secretary replaced Academy Superintendent John Gallagher, Commandant of Cadets General Taco Gilbert, and other key commanders.
We're doing what a company would do. We want to have a change. We want to have people think differently. We want to have our selected people, because we are ultimately responsible to the President, Secretary of Defense, the Congress, the American people for the school. We want our team in there.
There doesn't seem to be anybody who's held directly accountable for what we're seeing here. I do think that the leadership needs to be held accountable.
But is getting removed from your position enough?
In some cases, it may not be enough.
How could there be so many victims over so many years and the Air Force Academy leadership not know about them? Well, our investigation found they did. When we come back, information collected by the Academy, but ignored by the leadership. Former leaders of the Air Force Academy, including Superintendent General John Gallagher, said all along they were unaware of a sexual assault problem among female cadets. But our investigation found that, in fact, over the past 7 years, several administrations had been briefed about pervasive sexual assaults and harassment at the Academy, based on what are called climate surveys. We obtained a copy of one of the surveys and took it to Senator Wayne Allard.
I'm looking at some pretty astounding figures here, you know.
Allard then demanded copies of all the surveys from Air Force Secretary James Roche, surveys the Air Force had sought to keep private. On Capitol Hill, the revelation that Academy officials had known about the problem and done little angered members of Congress.
This crisis goes straight to the core values of the institution. Let's be honest, this has been a catastrophic failure of leadership and process.
In a hearing called by the Senate Armed Services Committee, Allard was firm but measured in his approach. Other senators didn't follow suit.
It is abundantly clear that the Secretary of the Air Force has proved himself totally incapable of handling this issue.
And we also have a clear pattern where it seems to me that no one is going to be held accountable for the climate that has made young women cadets fearful of reporting or leads to reprisal if they do.
Many of the senators had sponsored cadets to the Air Force Academy and were incensed that the Air Force Secretary and its top general were not willing to blame the current Academy leadership for a climate of accepting sexual assault.
Something was done improperly before they got there, and they continued to do things improperly. Therefore, they're off the hook? No, they're not. No way.
But while angry, none were as emotional as the senator from Minnesota.
To me, it's just shameful that it happens, and it's even more shameful that the Academy and the people in charge there let it happen, and just now, even now, say that you know, on the general, on lip service to caring about things, but don't do a damn thing about it. Shameful.
Just how shameful became even more evident when the Air Force finally released all the climate surveys they initially refused to give to us. Air Force officials claim some are not valid because only a few hundred of the 4,000 cadets responded. But the raw numbers are clear. In 1997, 19 women of 127 who responded said they were sexually assaulted while at the academy, 13 of those in the previous year. In 1998, 22 cadets of 500 responding said they were sexually assaulted, no gender noted. In 2000, 17 cadets of 314 reported being sexually assaulted, no gender noted. In 2001, 167 cadets of more than 2,000 who responded say they had been sexually assaulted at the academy, many more than once. And last year, 56 women say they were sexually assaulted, as well as 24 men. In every year surveyed, most assaults occurred in a dorm room or somewhere on the Air Force Academy grounds.
People in charge should have picked up on those numbers and realized there was a problem. Somebody needs to be held responsible. They were in charge, and it seemed clear to the committee, it seemed clear to me, that they should have been held responsible.
There is a new boss here at the Air Force Academy with a new mandate: change the culture within the Cadet Corps. But what does that mean? Next, General John White, the new Commandant of Cadets. His name is John White. He is a one-star general whose resume includes a stint with the Thunderbirds. A resume that says failure is not an option. His reputation says no matter what the mission, the answer is yes.
Great organizations are always looking to acknowledge their shortcomings, look at them right in the face, deal with them, and get on with life.
Did you play soccer before?
Yes, sir.
White has spent his first 6 weeks on campus making clear his expectations and building trust with cadets. So if and when those expectations are not met, there will be no surprises.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too, sir.
This issue is not about the culture at large. It's mostly about a subculture that existed or maybe even exists, that we have to make sure that the larger culture puts so much pressure on that subculture that subculture is not allowed to exist.
But White, an Academy graduate, acknowledges the attitude runs deep. Since women were first enrolled in 1976, there has always been some resentment among male cadets.
We've attacked this in every way that I know how and that our team knows how. We've attacked it with leadership. I've met with every single cadet multiple times. I've briefed them en masse, met with them in small groups. I've met with every one of the female cadets in 4 different sessions. You got to have an environment that embraces everybody. So we're looking really hard at even the subtle things. So here's my message. Our message is make sure that all team members are welcome.
Out there, 3, 4, out there, 3, 4.
Several of them have said to me, "Sir, I don't know anybody who's committed a sexual assault." I've challenged them. I said, well, have you ever heard a sexually oriented joke told in ranks and you didn't do anything about it?
Arch.
If you have, you're part of the problem.
While others may resent the investigation that has shaken the Academy and brought new leadership, White has embraced the changes as an opportunity.
I think they're great for the Academy. I think if you take the agenda for change in its entirety, when that's fully implemented, this is going to be a better institution than it was before. And as I told you on the day of my change of command, everybody has a part to play. Everybody has a stake in making our Academy better. So anybody out in your audience who has information about one of our members who hasn't lived up to our standards, I want to know about it.
Forward, on.
In my tenure here, we're not going to drop the ball.
Have a great day.
Coming up, the latest in the ongoing investigation of sexual assaults at the Air Force Academy.
Please hold your applause until all have been introduced.
This week's graduation provided Air Force officials a reprieve from 4 ongoing investigations into the cadet culture, climate, and conduct at the Air Force Academy.
Class of 2003, you are dismissed.
But even amidst the celebration, Air Force Secretary James Roche gave a preview of what the Air Force internal investigation is finding.
The culture, if not monitored correctly, can go awry. Some of the cadets did not want women here, never accepted the fact that women here.
The Air Force Inspector General is conducting a separate investigation of the Academy system and reviewing each of the rape and sexual assault reports of the past 10 years. The Department of Defense Inspector General, independent of the Air Force, is conducting another inquiry, examining whether female cadets were given due process or were intimidated by a system that punished victims. Finally, an independent civilian review panel begins its work next week. It will report to the Secretary of Defense and to Congress.
I think we're going to have constant oversight by the members of the Congress.
Senator Wayne Allard, at the forefront of this issue, says his office has received reports of sexual assault or rape from 57 current and former cadets, as well as from 1 civilian. He says even when all the reports are in, the story is not over.
I think that we need to have a report every year for the next 5 years that will go into detail as to whether the new program under new leadership is working or not.
The new program resulting from our investigation represents dramatic changes at the Air Force Academy. Among them, anyone who is sexually assaulted or witnesses a sexual assault will be given amnesty from Academy discipline, with the exception of the senior cadet present or anyone who tries to obstruct the investigation.
Order.
Female cadets will be in rooms clustered together within the dorms. Doors to dorm rooms will be wide open at all times when a non-roommate is present, and there will be 24-hour security in the dorms. Anyone providing alcohol to an underage cadet will be expelled immediately. Only senior cadets will now have control of disciplining freshmen.
1, 2, 3, 4.
But what the Air Force doesn't want to discuss is who is responsible for an academy climate many critics say has been hostile to women.
I think that we need to look at over the number of individuals that have been in charge of the academy and see who was doing their job and who wasn't. And I think those individuals need to be held accountable.
But so far, the Air Force has no plans to hold any individual officer accountable. Rather, it is hoping new leadership with a new mandate will bring a new level of confidence to female cadets.
We need to have men and women of integrity that are about serving others and that are about excellence.
10 years ago, there was a general in charge who took steps he thought would eliminate the serious problem of sexual assaults on female cadets. Well, Air Force officials now admit the steps didn't work. Why? Well, because there was no change in culture. The new Commandant of Cadets, now in place as a result of our investigation, faces a daunting challenge. That 10 years from now, there are not more victims who are afraid to come forward and who are suffering in silence. From the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, I'm John Ferrugia.